Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this professional learning opportunity. I am Jessica Roberts with NCEA, and I will be facilitating the webinar today. A few housekeeping notes as people are joining. If you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to use the Q&A or chat windows. We will be monitoring the questions and we'll try to answer them in the allotted time. Within 24 hours of today's webinar, you will receive an email with the link for the recording, as well as an online survey. Once you've completed the survey, a certificate of completion for the webinar will be emailed to you. Today's webinar is Play-Based Learning Strategies and is being presented by Stefanie Horgan from Archangel Education and Technology and Dr. Susan Netko. During this presentation, our speakers will discuss how children best learn through play. Strategies they will discuss include center play, small and large group ideas promoting learning across all domains, and unplugged activities that can safely introduce technology to younger students that can be easily integrated into your classroom practices. Before I turn it over to our speakers, let's go ahead and begin in prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. O Christ, our teacher, we thank you for the gift of Catholic schools, where the message of your life, death, and resurrection is proclaimed, discipleship is modeled, worship is cultivated, and community is experienced. Increase our zeal for ensuring that all children and families can benefit from an authentic Catholic education, and that Catholic schools grow in their ability to nurture the souls and form the minds of its students for generations to come. We ask this in your name. Amen.
Amen.
In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So thank you both for joining us on the webinar today, and I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Stefanie to get us started.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jessica. Thank you all for being with us today. As Jessica said, my name is Stefanie Horgan. I am the Director of Professional Development at Archangel Education and Technology, and I am joined today by Dr. Susan Netko, specializing in early childhood education. And we have got a really super exciting presentation for you today, chock full of ideas and ways that you can learn to embrace play in your classroom and add a little bit of fun and whimsy into your day every day. And so I wanted to start by telling you a little bit about myself. I am a former Catholic school teacher of various grades for 13 years in the Diocese of Raleigh. I am a former administrator for a number of years in the Diocese of Arlington, and last June I joined Archangel as the Director of Professional Development. I have 4 children, ages 15, 13, and twin 9-year-olds. They are all 4 boys, and so you want to talk about fun and whimsy. My day is full of it. And I'm going to pass it over to my co-presenter to let you tell a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Stefanie, and thank you, NCEA, for inviting us to share our ideas with you. My name is Dr. Susan Netko, and I, as well, have been a Catholic school teacher and principal in the Diocese of Raleigh and the Diocese of Arlington for 20 plus years. After I left my last principalship, I went into consulting and teacher coaching and continued my education to really specialize in leadership and early childhood education, which is where I focus a lot of attention on now because of the importance of. I also have 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls. They are married, and I have 12 grandchildren. So and also very proud that 2 of my children have gone on to become Catholic school educators. And of that, I'm pretty proud. So thank you for having me.
All right. Well, we'll jump right into it. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen right now. And we will jump right into play-based learning strategies. We are going to be sharing this presentation with you. And so we've got a lot of ideas in here, and I like to always start my webinars by prefacing that we are going to be sharing a lot of information with you today. However, please don't feel like you have to do all of it beginning tomorrow. We want you to pull one idea, one topic, one strategy from this webinar today and implement it into your classroom. Try one thing, and if it works, great, and if it doesn't, pick something else. If you find that something really works for you, pick something else and add it to with the next unit you move on to. We're not expecting you to totally change the way that you run your classroom if you run your classroom very differently. And so I want to encourage you to know that we are open to helping you. You can contact us. You will find our contact information at the end of this presentation, and contact us if you have any questions, because we are really invested in this. We really believe in this, and we are very happy to help in any way that we can. So let's jump right in.
Okay, I want you to think just for a moment about what the definition of play is in your current classroom design. So just for the next 5 to 10 seconds, think about how you define play in your classroom. Okay, Stefanie, you can. And I do want to mention that we may challenge your definition of play. During this presentation, we're going to ask you to reimagine your classroom with a new perspective on play, maybe a redefinition of what play is and how to implement that. And it may challenge some of your preconceived notions about play, but if you're open to it, I think you will be able to, as Stefanie said, bring some of those ideas into your current classroom design.
Let's talk about technology and how technology can be embraced in the pre-K classroom. Children these days are digital natives. That's what we call them. They are born with the ability to know and understand technology in ways that we never could. If you've ever handed an iPad to a 2-year-old, it's like they instinctively know what to do. With pressing apps and scrolling through, they know automatically what to do. It's unbelievable. So we need to embrace these technological concepts, but we also have to be wary of the fact that these are growing and developing minds. Their brains are super mushy at this point, and so we want to put lots of really fun ideas into their heads and learning, and we have to be really careful that we don't get them, quote unquote, addicted to a screen. And so how are we going to embrace these technological concepts without giving iPads or laptops or Chromebooks to 3 and 4-year-old, 5-year-olds? And there's a lot of ideas that we're going to discuss today. And I want you to know and understand the term unplugged coding. And so we'll talk a little bit more about what that means as we move on.
And we know through research, and many of you may be aware of the robust body of research surrounding play-based learning, but children are always learning. Research shows that play-based learning, which is also active learning, leads to the most successful student outcomes. So it makes one consider, why do we not implement it more if it's proven to improve student outcomes? And we know a lot of reasons why. There can be a lot of obstacles that get in our way, that, some things that we can control and some that we can't. And hopefully we will learn how to utilize the various forms of play to reach the goals with that, and also be able to reach those mandates that we are held to. And I want you to think about this for a minute too. At no other time in a person's life do they learn more than the ages birth through 8 years of age. While we continue to learn, those are the most formative years, as Stefanie just mentioned, about their minds, and they're like sponges and the best time for them to learn. So we want to give them the most applicable information for them to apply to their world. But have you ever wondered, what would the principal or other teachers or parents say if they come walk by my classroom and saw my students play all day? And that is a real concern. When I polled some teachers before, I asked, why they didn't use it. And one was, really basically not everybody understood the premise of play-based learning. So in understanding how to do this, you can then, curb some of these concerns that people have about playing all day in the classroom. So what is play? Definition of play, very well known in the area of research, is any mental or physical activity with notable attributes. Pretty broad, right? Within that, research and theorists agree that children are capable. They are very capable. They can take an active role in their planning, in their selecting, in their designing, and in their play, thus taking ownership of their learning. And with that control that they have over their experience, it deepens their learning. It helps with their decision making, their cognitive skills, their critical thinking skills, and all of those life skills that we are trying to teach them.
I think it's really interesting, like when you watch the younger children, especially with like pretend play, how they develop these rules. I see that with my own kids too, how they develop rules for the games that they play. They develop their own parameters, and it's not adult led, it's child led.
And that's an introduction, Stephanie, that you bring that up is very interesting, because that's an introduction to societal norms. While we can do what we want to do and how we do it, we still have to survive within the societal constraints. So that's a really good point. Thank you for bringing that up. So I first like to talk about what play-based learning is by starting with what it's not. It is not independent, chaotic, free, do what you want whenever you want, all day play with no teacher direction. It isn't, which this might look a little bit like free play to you, and we will talk about that, but all play is not free play. While it is child-centered, it's not always just whatever the child wants to do. If you have parents or have been a teacher a long time, if you have children and you've been a parent for a long time, or you've been a teacher for a long time, you understand exactly what I'm saying. Turning a child loose and just saying, have at it, is not necessarily going to reach the goals that you have set forth. But it is learning through purposeful play. It's natural learning that takes place in play and engages the child, their sense of the world, they interact with others, and then they take that information and acclimate it or assimilate it into their own world.
So play-based learning is really interesting because it is self-chosen by the child. It's something that they enjoy, but it's also teacher-guided with a process. And that's really important to know, because we're going to be talking about goals. And, as teachers, we plan all the time. We are constantly planning. It's just one of the many roles that we have. And so it's really important to know and understand that play-based learning is very process-oriented. Even though it is child-selected and very fun for them, it is teacher-guided and process-oriented. Also with technology, we're going to be talking today about centers. And with centers, these are great places to learn self-discovery. Students can go into a center and see what it looks like, what it smells like, what it feels like. The kitchen, they can pretend to play in the kitchen, or build with Legos or blocks. They can discover the identified concept and complete activities based on what the goal of the lesson is. When we talk about unplugged, I want to talk to you about the idea that unplugged coding are lessons that teachers can use to introduce basic algorithms. And with computers, algorithms are programming that gives directions to a computer to complete a task. We can do that offline. We don't necessarily have to be sitting in front of a computer in order to develop directions to complete a task. And so this can be easily transferred to hands-on activities. And so we're going to be talking with you and giving you ideas about various unplugged coding activities that you can use in in the classrooms that can be placed into centers that could be student-led, could be teacher-directed through direct instruction in various places. What we're looking to develop with these unplugged activities are the computational skills. We want students to learn that stick-with-itness, what grown-ups call perseverance, that comes with that testing and retesting method, that it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to fail at something. I always tell my students that the word fail, F-A-I-L, is a first attempt in learning. And first attempt in learning doesn't mean that you never ever get it right. It means that you are trying and you need to try again. And so none of my students, even if they fail, are going to in life fail. It's simply the first attempt in learning. And so it develops those computational skills that are so very important to 21st century careers. So let's talk a little bit about play.
Yeah. And I was going to, if I could tag onto that, Stefanie, just an interesting observation in what you say is when I was a principal at my second school, I was introducing technology to the school because it was very limited technology. And I went to my preschool 3 teacher and I said, okay, I was so excited. I said, what technology do you want in your classroom? And she said, I want a screen and I want a projector. And I said, that's it? She said, well, maybe one iPad. But she said, my students already know how to work a screen. I need to teach them that thought process without the screen. So that just is real life. And that's when I went ding, ding, ding. I said that was brilliant. So I think this fits right into that. So thank you for that. So if we think about play as a spectrum, there's lots of different kinds of play. And even if we look at this slide, these are 4 broad areas. And you can even, if you get really into it, you can really break these down a little bit more. But I like this visual of a spectrum, considering it a spectrum. So on the far left, you see free play. And on the far right, you see direct instruction. And then in between, you see guided and games. And the difference is mostly determined by the teacher's role. So free play is child self-directed led. It's little adult involvement and has very loosely defined learning goals. So if you go outside for recess and certainly you want them to exercise their muscles and maybe you might give them a little challenge or something, there's no pedagogical learning goal associated with that necessarily. And they get to do basically whatever they want within the confines of the playground or centers or whatever. Choose whatever you want, do whatever you want, play whatever you want. On the other side of that is direct instruction. And that has the absolute most adult involvement, and it has specific learning objectives. And the important thing is to keep it short and keep it playful. And we'll show you how to do that. But some children, direct instruction is certainly not a bad word, or not bad words. Some students need direct instruction. I, for one, need someone to kind of tell me first and then let me discover. And we just have to keep in mind different learning styles and strategies that are out there. Guided play is the play that I think is most often misrepresented in play or misunderstood in play-based learning. And it's more than free play. It's less than direct, but it is adult scaffolded, but it's child-centered. So the teacher is planning using objectives. And then games, which, as Stefanie talked about, students coming up with their own games, they a lot of times are molded after the games that we teach them to play. And they are, again, adult design and scaffolded. And they do teach rules and teach children how to, they learn through the games, but they still have to follow directions, instructions, rules, and that sort of thing. So, while play-based learning is child-centered, that does not mean that the teacher isn't important. The teacher is critical, absolutely vital in play-based roles. They are the planners. As Stefanie said, we're always planning as teachers, the organizers, and they're the facilitators. So we plan what's going to happen, we organize what's going to happen, and we facilitate that happening. And I also want to tag on Stefanie a little bit, what she said about taking some of these things and molding them into what you already have in place. Thinking about the things that you do well and that you want to keep that work for you, and then just maybe transition a little bit. But you are the field experts. You are the field experts. You know what's going on in your classroom. So as a planner, the very first thing we do is identify learning objective. What's the purpose? There's, everything we do in a day has a purpose. Then we have to determine how we're going to introduce that concept. Do I want to do it small group or large group? Do I want to do an inquiry based or direct instruction or discovery? Or do I want to issue a problem and let them solve it? Then, of course, after we've said, okay, this is what we're going to do, we have to decide how we're going to provide the practice. Do we have the materials? Are we going to do some activities inside, outside, both? Are we going to do centers? And if we do centers, they should be deliberately selected, promote discovery, and accommodate all learners. And what I mean by that is you may have your play centers, your free play centers, where they can go to dramatic play or they can go to blocks or that sort of thing. But when you are guided, when you're using guided play, you're going to want to say, okay, these are the parameters. You have choice within those parameters. And I always like to say, think about it like if you have children, instead of saying pick out what you want to wear, it's do you want to wear the red one? Do you want to wear the blue one? Which one would you like to play, inside or outside? We're going to go play, but where do you want to play? So there's choice within that, within that framework. And then assessment, something that's sometimes overlooked, especially in early childhood learning, is assessment. I have to provide evidence that learning took place. So how will I evaluate that? So that's all in the planning process.
Yeah, I think, I want to jump in because I've got a story. When I was an assistant principal, I observed one of my teachers during farm week. Every week they had a theme and a letter and a number that went with it. And so during farm week, I walked into the classroom and all of the desks were pushed into the cubbies back in, and it was just completely open. And I said, whoa, what's going on? And the teacher said, welcome to farm week. And she was wearing overalls and she was wearing a big straw hat and she was wearing her mucking boots. And she showed me that during farm week, they were going to be discovering how to milk a cow. And that was one thing that she did. She set up chairs and she hooked up a string that contained hanging filled gloves, latex gloves, and they were they had little pin pricks in them, and no student allergies to latex. That's important to note. But she had a little bit of water in each of them, and the students would learn what it was like to milk a cow, and they experienced that. And then she had them talk about that experience, and some of them liked it, some thought it was gross, some thought it felt weird, and they talked about it. And then they went over to the auditory station and they listened, and they had click clack moo, cows that type, and they listened to the story being read as they looked at the book. And then they walked over to the station that had some sand, it had some rock, like little pebbles, it had mud, and it had water, and they could feel all of those different things, things that you might encounter on a farm. And so it was totally, the kids were obsessed with it. They were so excited about that experience. However, it was extremely structured. The students had their goals. They knew what it was doing. They knew the purpose of it. And the direct instruction came at a time when the teacher would sit at a table in the middle, and she would pull 2 or 3 students at one time, teach them the concept, and then complete an activity with them that required a little bit more adult intervention, like paint. And so they would complete the activity with paint with the adult supervision, and the direct instruction took place in very small groups. And so it was one of the most well done center play-based activities that I have ever seen, with a common theme. And it was so well planned that it was flawlessly executed.
And that is a really important thing. We have to plan flawlessly. We have to plan for all those things that we know are going to happen because we teach children. So we know, but we also tie the assessment to the purpose, and then that helps us. So just in that situation, they had lots of different ways to reach the goals. And I want to piggyback on what you said, Stefanie, about the children understanding the purpose. The children have to understand the purpose. Telling them the purpose is fine. The purpose is you are going to learn about the farm, or this activity you're going to practice the sea and cow, or something like that. Because, and I love that experience, and that's a really good example, because not every child, if you live in the city, you don't have experience on a farm. And so they can take whatever experience and acclimate it into their current level experience, and then they can grow from that. So that's a really good example of how play-based learning individualizes that learning.
It was also
wonderful.
Really cool. Something else that I really liked was she had carrots, little carrot cutouts, and vegetable cutouts, and the students had to match the lowercase letter with the uppercase letter that was the top to the, like if it was the top to the carrot, they would match the lowercase c to the uppercase C, which would Velcro together and make the bottom and the top of the carrot. And then they would make the little sprout to the tomato, if it was a T, capital T, and a lowercase t. And so they were at that particular center, the goal was uppercase and lowercase letters, identifying what goes together. So just another.
So again, that's a really good, but that's a really good example of that draws a picture of, while it's adult scaffolded, the children have choice and they have the opportunity to test and do does this one go with this one? Oh no, it doesn't, and test and try. So even though it's an adult planned activity, the student gets to choose within the confines of those. So that's a really good example. And then while we're talking about assessments, I think it's important that we just kind of remember that when we use play in the classroom, anytime we do anything, we have to show evidence. And I know I work with a lot of teachers that say I really struggle with collecting evidence of learning in the preschool classroom, because I don't have time to write anecdotal notes, or I don't have time to do a checklist. So we talk about different ways to do it, but we have to understand that to teach the whole child, we have to assess the whole child. So when we tie the assessment directly to the objective, and just in that situation that Stefanie discussed, if the goal is, can the child recognize upper and lowercase c, how many ways in just that setup can the teacher see if the child can recognize uppercase and lowercase c's? I mean, there's just so many opportunities. And then, but assessments should always drive our planning and our goal setting. And they're just a reminder, there are 4 different kinds that we most often talk about, and it's formative, summative, and then the formal and informal.
So when we talk about formal assessments, this is, I don't know another way to say it, it's the most formal. It's the one that is a system-based, standardized grading. It evaluates the student's knowledge. So it might be a standardized test. It might be a written test like multiple choice in the classroom. It might be a quiz or a project that contains a rubric with specified goals. It might be a portfolio that the students put together. And these are not necessarily just for the pre-K kindergarten classroom. These are, in general, ways of formally assessing students. You can do observations, you can have running records. Oftentimes administration asks us to perform running records multiple times throughout the year to show student growth, and then you have trackable data. That's all very formalized. And then you have informal assessments. Informal assessments are student evaluation. They don't have a standard grading system. Okay, these are what you observe in the classroom. These are your anecdotal notes, your portfolios that show the growth. These help a lot with parent conferences. These are really great when you're able to show a student how they wrote their name on day 2 versus day 95. And you can show the growth through those 2 pieces of paper. You also, one thing I learned many years ago through a professional development that I went to, at my former high school, I went to this professional development, and I had a teacher there who showed me a way that they kept their anecdotal notes, and I adopted that system into my classroom. And it was a folder, and I had a different color folder for each of the classes that I taught. And in that folder had a sticky note, and at the top of the sticky note was each child's name. So I had 20 sticky notes in a folder, and I would, as I was going around, I would open the folder and I would jot notes, and it was just little bullet points that things that I would observe. Holding a pencil incorrectly, pencil grip is incorrect. Work with the student to correct it. Continuing to mix up B's and D's. Showing real growth, staying, identifying shapes, something like that. And so then as I filled up the sticky note, I would just put another sticky note on top of that child. And so I would just keep these notes, and then I would take them out when I was done with them and drop them into their file. And so when I went to go meet with a parent, I would pull their file out and have these anecdotal notes, things that I didn't necessarily have to keep I didn't have to take a lot of time because it was done while I was doing my observations naturally.
And that's kind of what, and I can tell you too, as far as choice goes with the portfolios, a lot of times you can have children select what they want to go in their portfolio, or they say, do you want this to go in, or maybe we need something this, how are you going to show me that you can do this? And they can do something to throw it in their portfolio. And I use those sticky notes too, Stephanie, and I've suggested that a lot because it doesn't matter if it's on the back of a napkin, on a sticky note, or on a formalized checklist. But the fact is, we can have a folder or a clipboard with sticky notes much easier than we can have, formalized records that we write. So that's really good. And I would do the same thing, throw them in there. And then that's real evidence. That's real-time evidence when you show the sticky note to the parent, the date and what you noticed, that actually helps them be able to support whatever learning that you've recognized in the classroom. Mm-hmm. And then talking about formative assessments, the purpose of a formative assessment is to guide instruction for improved student learning outcomes. So in taking Stefanie's example of the sticky note, we can use that as a formative assessment, saying, so-and-so is not doing well with a pencil grip. I think in centers, I'm going to ensure that there are more writing utensils, or we're going to have more practice. And then providing those materials where they almost selected. And you use that during instruction to monitor ongoing feedback and strengths, growth areas, topics that you maybe interest. I've done an interest survey, and those things guide your instruction. And conversely, a summative assessment, the purpose of a summative assessment is to see if students achieve the purpose. Again, why we have to have evidence. We have to have assessments to determine the length that the learning took place. So we use it after instruction. Think of it in terms of, a spelling test. I use spelling tests. I worked with a teacher who was required to give spelling tests on Friday, starting kindergarten. That was a mandate. Believe it or not, it didn't really matter. That was a mandate. So it had to be done. But that isn't the only assessment the teacher had to could use to assess whether or not, I mean, if the purpose is to find out if they could spell these words, you can do that formatively and summatively. So while they might fail a test for whatever reason, that's where you might learn about test anxiety or stress or whatever, might come about. That isolates it, the entire grade or the entire learning objective is not set on one test or one written test. And, and then we talk about, the teacher's an organizer. So we already see the teachers plan. But guess what? We organize too. We got to organize the students. We organize the learning environment. We have to initiate and provide the activities, instructions, materials. And then of course we have to close those lessons, and then we have to provide them with timely and specific feedback. So yeah, you can put your event organizer hat on for this one, because we have got a boatload of organizing to do. And as you know, the better planned and organized you are, the better outcomes you're going to achieve. And then of course, teacher's facilitator. We ask purposeful questioning. So rather than providing the answer or the one correct answer, we ask questions that guide. They predict, evaluate, reflect, and promote that critical thinking aspect. And of course, we model that. I might model that by interacting with a child. So maybe I would say, you don't know how to start. Let me see. I wonder what would happen if I didn't know what I was going to do. How would I make a decision? You know what? I might think about what I like first or what I'm interested in. I really like cars. So maybe I'll start there. So modeling that thought process, which it is, I mean, you could think of it as direct instruction, but it's essentially that modeling, and then they're going to do the same thing. It gives them a place to start. Telling them to be creative and imagine if they don't necessarily know how to spark that. And that's where sometimes your direct instruction comes in. And I like to think of guided play as bumper bowling. If you know what bumper bowling is, you go bowling, and I can bowl really well in bumper bowling. Not so well without the bumpers. So, but if your bumpers are in place, it's your bumpers in the alley or the gutters, and you have, so when they throw, when a child or when a person throws a ball, if the bumpers are in place, chances are they're going to hit a pin. They're more likely than not to hit a pin. So think of that as far as guided play. If learning bumpers are in place, then the children are more likely than not to hit their goal. Hit the goal that you're trying. Maybe not in the same way you would, maybe not in the same way as everybody else, but understanding that purpose and the goal, what you want to see out of them. So just an example of a lesson plan, and Stefanie's already given us a couple of really good examples of center-based learning and that sort of thing. But there is an approach called developmentally appropriate practice, and that is a method or an approach to planning and providing materials to extend learning. But for our purposes here, I just want to tell you that it's providing materials to allow students to go as far as they can go. So a lot of times in universal designing and developmentally appropriate practice, we look at what we want everybody to do, and we know that some are going to be able to do this and some are going to be able to do that, but we don't want to limit. We don't want to put them in a box. So my goal in this, I want them to identify specific shapes. So I want my students to identify various shapes. All students, so every single student will recognize flat or 2D square, circle, triangle, rectangle, and oval. That's what everybody's I want everybody at the end of my lesson or unit or whatever to be able to identify at least those. Now, I'm in those centers or in those activities, I might provide materials that will allow for students to discover stars or rhombus, or, maybe make cubes or cones and extend into 3D, but not everybody has to do that. So I would not design an activity where they had to make a cube if my purpose was a flat square. So I might start with, in a whole group, I might ask students to, do turn and talk and tell their neighbors something they know about shapes, anything. If they don't know where to start, I might say, I wonder what my favorite shape is. I think my favorite shape might be a square because, or whatever it might be. And then you model that and let them turn and talk. And then maybe this is where our direct instruction might take in. I'll show images of shapes to students in various contexts and discuss. Stefanie talked about that with the milking of the cow, with the gloves idea. She took that direct instruction, made it playful, and did it in small group. This could be whole group or small group, however you choose to do it. And then put in here a link that might read a story. This is, Stefanie, can you click on that hyperlink for me? So this is the picture. It's a Tangled. It's a book about shapes, and it's one of my favorites. It's really, really cute. It's about shapes that get tangled up in a jungle gym. So it's really probably pretty relevant to most of the students.
So when we talk about guided play, we have guided play indoor and outdoor. So I want to start by talking about guided play indoor. What we did was we created these example centers that you can use, based around this shape idea. So the goal is identify these basic 5 shapes. And so maybe you have the student guide matchbox cars around various shapes on the rug. You don't have to have just FYI, you don't have to have a rug to do that. You can do that with painter's tape. You can lay painter's tape on the ground. I did not have a rug in my classroom for a lot of years, but tape works really well. FYI, Expo markers stain the floor. Learned from experience, thought I would pass that on. Don't use Expo markers on the floor. You would think they would rub off easily. They don't. Tangrams, I love tangrams. Blocks, and most recently magnetiles. Magnetiles have become very affordable lately. This could be something that maybe a parent can donate, or if you have a wish list, you have gift cards that you can use. Amazon sells them, Target sells them, Walmart sells them, but magnetiles are great. They're just tiles, that very colorful tiles that are in basic shapes, and they have magnets in them, and you can build 3D shapes with these magnetiles. They stick together. Students can trace and color shapes, and students can cut and paste shapes. Now I want to be really wary of this, because your goal is that students can identify the shapes. It's not, can students cut and color within the lines? So if you're not assessing that goal, be very wary not to mark a student down, because what your goal is simply to identify the shapes. So can they trace and color a shape? Can they identify the shape when they cut and paste it? Say, they hold it up and they say, hey, look, Mrs. Horgan, I cut a circle and it doesn't look anything like a circle, but they have identified that a circle is round, and they can hold up that shape and say, hey, I cut a circle, even if they're not able to use, their fine motor skills quite yet to cut a perfect circle. I also put in here, this is just an example. You can use popsicle sticks to recreate shape patterns. So what I did was, maybe your students are on a table and you have taped out the shape that you want them to recreate, and they can manipulate the popsicle sticks to replicate the shape that you give them. It does not have to be, it can be any number side shape. You might be wary of a dodecahedron, but basic shapes are
Somebody
fine.
in there is going to know a dodecahedron, though, and they're going to make
there is a kid that's going to know what a dodecahedron is. We've all had that kid. My kid was one of those kids.
Yes, your kid was. So what's interesting, though, to me, Stefanie, about, and to tag onto your, can you go back one slide, the indoor play, looking at these 6 centers? So you don't have to have all of these 6 centers, and not every child has to do every center. Correct. Because again, as Stefanie pointed out, we're looking at what's my purpose. I really, at this point, don't care if they can cut or color. That's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for, do they know? So look how many opportunities you have to provide children that they can, to see whether or not that you can assess whether or not they can see those or whether they can reach those goals. And it doesn't matter how, they can demonstrate that in any of these. And that's where the choice comes in. That's the self-directed. You have put those bumpers in. These are the bumpers. So they may bounce. They could stay in, one center for 20 minutes if they love it, or they could do, I don't want to do this, and go off to another center, however you structure your centers, but they can choose. That's the choice element. Okay, you can go back to outdoor. I'm sorry, Stefanie.
Okay. No, that's fine. I just want to be mindful of our time. We're at 3:46.
Yeah.
So just be mindful.
Okay.
Of
So, because as you know, I could probably talk about this like for the next 5 days. So I apologize. And you keep me on track. I'm listening. So, and outside, I've decided on this one of the outdoor activities we're going to do is we're going to take a nature walk. Okay. And what I want to do in that nature walk is see if they can identify shapes. So whatever activity I select, maybe I'm going to say, okay, they're going to take a little checklist, and Stefanie will show you that, scavenger hunt, or maybe I'm going to say they're going to draw a picture, but maybe I might say, I want you to find at least 2 shapes when we walk outside. And so this is, the shapes of a tree, a leaf, rocks, flowers, whatever shapes were. And then Stefanie, you want to add something about the Pope's encyclical, yes?
Yeah. I think it's really important to note that even the youngest students can be brought in when we're talking about the Pope's encyclical Laudato Si. It's all about caring for creation. So this is a great opportunity to introduce that concept of taking care of our creation, the creation that God has put before us, even if it's just mentioning it. And we can refer to an encyclical as just a teaching document that the Pope gives us for, how God wants us to live our lives. And so this is a great opportunity to bring in that caring for creation with those Catholic social teaching principles into your classroom without going into, this is the Pope's encyclical, Laudato Si, here's your 100-page document. For 3 and 4-year-olds, you can talk about just taking care of the earth, and they can very easily understand that. When we talk about assessment, we've pretty much already identified this, but can students identify the shapes? We don't care how they identify the shapes. If they can draw it, if they can use their finger to show it, if they can do Play-Doh, if they can draw it in the dirt, if they can walk around the classroom and point to various things that are that shape, those are all assessments of their knowledge of this goal. You can have, believe me, you can have multiple goals. We're simplifying it right now for just shapes, but you can have multiple goals going. We would never get through the curriculum if we didn't have multiple goals going at one time. But for our purposes today, we are simplifying it and just saying our goal is identifying these shapes.
And then I'm going to probably move through these pretty quickly. And I want to let everybody know that, again, you have our contact information. We can go further if you want to have a conversation. But I do want to make sure we at least get to these. We'll have to do another webinar, Stefanie, and go into depth the other way. But anyway, if you want to extend that cross-curricular learning into ELA, you could do maybe one story, tell a story, write or draw a story or a comic book, or a comic strip, paint a picture, perform a play, maybe a play about shapes, or a play about your nature walk, make puppets, and make shapes with Play-Doh. I mean, if you want it, however you want to do with ELA, maybe a story they make after their Tangled book, maybe they make their shapes of the Play-Doh and then they tell a story about that. So whatever, again, you would tailor these to what you want your goal to be.
In including these unplugged tech centers, I've mentioned with robots and Legos for science, you can also include color patterns. Color patterns are an introduction to binary coding. And so you can use basic color patterns. With technology, you can have maybe an older student create a picture, a simple picture, a shape, and then use students or have your students use cup stacking to recreate the picture. So maybe instead of popsicle sticks, they recreate it with cups. With music and movement, you can do I do, you do, we do. So I'll do a movement, then you do the movement, then we do the movement together. Listening with Simon Says. Again, this is all about following directions and creating a task. With listening, that skill is Simon Says. And then instrument repeating. Bells, so I'll do a pattern with a bell, and then you'll do the pattern with a bell. Or I'll shake my maraca a certain way, and you have to mimic it. And so these are all unplugged activities that are introductions to coding algorithms. And so that will lead to a deeper knowledge once students get to those activities when they're older.
And so I think that it's really important to really embrace the idea of asking those probing questions. A lot of times we want to solve problems for the students. We want to say, you know what, try it this way. It'll probably work that way. We don't want to do that in play-based learning. We want them to figure it out, to analyze, evaluate, create, and apply those important learning skills. Stefanie, can you click on this? I just wrote a little bit of a couple examples. This is a little document that we talked about strategies with some different probing questions, and then we talked about some other guided play. So that's just a document that's embedded in there that you can link and you can see some of the differences. Okay, Stefanie, move on. So free play, as we talked about, it's critical. You know, it's really important for children to be able to play freely. There are benefits: imagination, creativity, role playing, and social emotional skills. So there's a lot of benefits, but the entire school day or the entire learning day should not be completely free play. And so we're just looking at the differences between free play and guided play. In free play, learning settings are not intentional. There's no specific goals. Is, for example, thinking of blocks. If I want to put blocks in my free play center, they can do whatever they want with blocks. But if I want them to discover shapes with blocks, I'm going to put them in a guided center so that they have to identify those shapes. Teacher observes and may ask questions and intervene, but only when necessary. And then, you know, you can note any observations, but you're not required to have any evidence of learning. Guided play, though, is intentionally planned learning settings. So they're intentionally planned. There are specific learning goals. Teacher observes and asks open-ended questions to extend learning. What do you think is going to happen? What is that shape? How is that shape used? What's the difference between a triangle and a square? And there is evidence required to show that child's mastering or the skill or achieving the goal. And you do that through your assessment, whatever that is. Games are a great way to learn. They are, aside from teaching content like color, shapes, whatever, they have these benefits of things like, you know, those life skills about respect, help others. This is also a really good time that to bring in those Catholic social teaching practices as well in communication, cooperation, respect, self-respect, helping others. But they also learn to play with rules. They develop patience, waiting their turn, self-esteem, those kinds of things.
So we ventured out a little bit more just to give you some fun ideas of some indoor games that you can do with this idea of unplugged coding in your centers, in your pre-K kindergarten classrooms. And so one is memory matching. And that's a great skill. That's a great life skill, but it's also a good introduction for coding as well. You can match larger shapes to their smaller sized counterparts. So if you have a big square and a tiny square, students can match them together. Again, that matching is an introduction to an unplugged activity. And then indoor board games. Candyland is a great game. I have played hours of Candyland. And so it's a great opportunity for students to learn the rules, and if they have to go back, then they can learn to, hopefully not throw a temper tantrum. This is an activity for following directions. These are color-coded bracelets. Coding, color-coded, get it? Okay. So they can you pick a bead color for each letter of your name. And then you color the box next to the letter to show what color it is. And then you thread the beads on your bracelet. So I use the name Anna as an example, and pink for the A, blue N, pink A. And again, this is an introduction to binary coding.
And this could be done with numbers or letters or whatever. That's a great activity.
And this is a story and an activity. Very Hungry Caterpillar, one of my favorites, Eric Carle. And so we have to get our caterpillar all the way through till she eats and becomes a beautiful, beautiful butterfly. And so the teacher can read the story, and students would draw an arrow as they come across the food in the order in which the caterpillar eats. So for example, they would draw a down arrow right here because the leaf is eaten first, an over arrow because the apple is second, the pear is third, so they would draw an up arrow. And that's an example of fun activity. And finally, discovery boxes. I've given you directions for how to create a discovery box. Talk to me more if this is something you're interested in, but it's basically a box that you fill with lots of items of that particular thing. So if you have square, maybe you would put a square paper, a sign, maybe a dice that has square sides. And students would use those discovery boxes to explore more of the ideas. And then with direct instruction, you want to keep it short and keep it playful, as we've discussed before. With the next steps, we want to keep in mind. Go ahead.
Oh, for me?
Yeah.
We're talking about the next steps. Okay, so
yep.
Play achieves success. Evidence shows that it is successful across, and this is important, all ages and all domains. And as Stefanie said at the start of the webinar, start small. Pick a little piece. If you read Very Hungry Caterpillar, try her caterpillar game and see how it works out. And then this is just some research and reminders of how to plan. It's supported by research and mindfully planned learning so the children play their way to a new understanding. So play your way to understanding, but it's important again to define that purpose. And then of course, don't forget your assessment piece.
And then finally, in summary, just how you want to set up your lessons, define your goal and your objective. What is the best way to achieve that goal? Design your assessment to evaluate the learning. And then what is your purpose and what is your assessment, and balance the types of play throughout the day. And remember that it's not always about the activity itself. It's about the purpose behind the activity. So think outside the box. We encourage you to be creative, to have fun, and we can't wait to hear more about it. And thank you all for joining us today. Jessica, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Perfect. Thank you both for coming and speaking about this topic. I think it was such a great refresher for me, also coming from early childhood education. But I really do appreciate you both being here, and Archangel Education and Technology for sponsoring this webinar. If you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out to Stefanie or Dr. Susan Netko with any of your questions, or you can reach out to NCEA with membership at ncea.org. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.